Hello and welcome to the Arise interview, where we take time to reflect on the big stories from the news and on the fortunes and affairs of the world in an hour of conversation with commentators, analysts and thought leaders. I'm Charles Anyagolu. Coming up in the next 60 minutes, as mass protests against police violence continue across several cities in Nigeria for the 8th straight day, the Nigerian army issues a warning to those it described as subversive elements and troublemakers, pledging loyalty to President Buhari and saying it is ready to support the civil authority to maintain law and order. It comes as the government's Security Committee in Abuja announces a ban on all EndSARS street demonstrations in the Nigerian capital, saying they violate COVID-19 safety protocols and endanger the lives of citizens. So, has the government's patience finally snapped? And are we likely to see troops deployed on the streets of Nigeria's major cities where the protests are most vigorous? Or is it perhaps time for the Nigerian authorities to seize the moment and restructure and refocus not just the police, but also the country itself, as some politicians have suggested? We'll hear from one of Nigeria's most prominent politicians, the former presidential candidate and two-term governor of Cross River State, Donald Duke, coming up. So, with the Nigerian army weighing in and the government Security Committee in Abuja announcing a ban of the EndSARS protest for violating COVID-19 safety protocols, but with the demonstrators remaining defiant and vowing to continue their protests, how big a crisis is all this now for Nigeria? For some observers, the crisis has escalated, and to a large extent, this country is now in uncharted territory, because Nigerians have never seen thousands of this country's youths gathering on the streets in such unprecedented numbers, unbidden, and calling openly for fundamental reforms. So this is really a huge moment for Nigeria, and the government seems rather unsure how to respond to it because, of course, the whole world is watching, as are millions of Nigerians, as each day continues to unfold on the streets.
Happening here is an awakening. You know, it's about time that Nigeria stop managing the system. Stop just enduring, because that's exactly what we've been doing. We've been coasting. You know, right now, it's about time that you're accountable to us. The government is answerable to us. You don't sit there and say things and expect us to act on whatever you say. You act on what we say. We put you there. SARS oppresses people. SARS, it's discouraging to have a government like this that allows people to treat us the way they treat us with no repercussions. It's unfair for the youth. It's unfair for me who doesn't have any children. If we allow these kind of things to continue, we're not going to have a Nigeria left.
Yeah, so you can imagine I'm not a lawyer. I'm not a doctor. I'm not an engineer. I'm in entertainment. So are you telling me that because I'm in entertainment, you can stop me, take my iPhone, take my money, take my freedom? Every single time I get to a toll gate or any single time I see a SARS or a police officer, my heart skips. In this country, and I'm a young person. Now, we don't want that. The second thing I want to address right now is the injustice of it all.
Somebody told me something the other day. He said, Nigeria has a lot of other problems. So why is it this one? I said, bros, if you go into exam hall and they give you 100 questions, do you answer from 100 at once? You start from 1. Fine. This one, it's someone that is alive that will be fighting for other things.
No, this looks like, oh, these small children have come. You don't even understand where we are at. I wish you understood how we feel right now. I wish you understand. We hear that people die every day. The next day we're coming out. Guy, don't read. You don't read. It's not business as usual. We they hear people, they die. We they come out. Check them, think them. What do you think they go through our mind? It's not business as usual. You don't read.
Emotions running very high on Nigerian streets there. Well, one man who draws the youth of Nigeria by the thousands by the sheer force of his personality and his boundless charisma, is the lawyer, musician, broadcaster, motorbike enthusiast and politician Donald Duke, two-term governor of Cross River State and former presidential candidate. And Donald Duke joins me now via WebEx from Lagos. Absolutely delighted to have you, Mr. Duke. It's been a challenge trying to get you on, but I know you're a busy man, so we appreciate the time that you've taken to talk to us today. What do you make of these protests against police brutality, which have been taking place in many cities across Nigeria?
Well, thank you, Charles. Thanks for having me. And I apologize if I put you through stress in having this talk. Well, you know, what you're finding or what is being expressed now is frustration that has been brewing for several years. These are young people who are articulate, who are organized, who are focused, and who've come to believe that, look, they've got to take their destiny into their hands. And the folks who are in charge of the country at this moment are perhaps not addressing the challenges they face. SARS is simply emblematic of a larger problem, a problem whereby a nation is seen as being rudderless, as no one is in charge, no one is held accountable, you can get away with anything. Deeper still is the fact that these folks in the prime of their lives are not able to actualize themselves. They're educated, they're exposed. In a world of interconnectivity, they see what's going on in other parts of the world. And they say, why not here? Are we second-rate human beings? And so, at your introduction, you mentioned the army saying they would step in and restore law and order. That is hogwash. That is nonsense. The same army has not been able to establish law and order in the Northeast. They're stretched bare, and they now want to establish law and order in the rest of the country. This is a mentality, and I'm really surprised at Buratai at this. This is a mentality that is far not in consonance, certainly not in consonance with democratic ideals. And I must say that so far, the president has been uncharacteristically restrained. The instinct is really to go out there and get everyone beaten up and brought into line. But he has so far held himself back. And this is important that he continues to do so and engage these people. What they want is not what the rest of us don't want, but they have the energy and they have come out and they articulate it. So let's talk to them.
Those are very good points that you make there. So with this sort of awakening amongst the youths and the realization that they make up 60% of the population of Nigeria, some estimates even put that higher, and therefore can command attention. I mean, I've heard some of them looking ahead to the next presidential election in 2023. I mean, as a former presidential candidate yourself who has inspired many young people and has a large followership amongst them, tell us about the power of the youth that you're seeing today and what you feel the youth can do.
Well, what you're seeing here is the cream of our youthful population, the educated ones, the exposed ones, the urbanites, not the rural youth, right? So don't discountenance them. These are folks that have a voice, who are spread in various industries, who have the energy to go in and mobilize. This is perhaps one of the most organized protests in this country. They're raising funds globally. They're feeding themselves. They're taking care of themselves medically. They are awakening to the fact that it's not every 4 years you come in and solicit their support here and there. They now want to take a place, have a seat in the hall. They're no longer onlookers. And this is going to lead to several other things. So the sooner you engage them and understand them, because you're building the nation for them. For most of us, our best before date has since lapsed. So you're preparing the nation for the next generation. Yes, you're contemptuous of that generation. When, maybe we'll talk about restructuring and other things, but it's important that we engage them and not allow these folks unbridled. In some nations, Hong Kong, the United States, look, protests can go on endlessly. Hong Kong has gone on for months now on protests. And in the course of that, literally everything comes to a standstill. You can't afford to have COVID and have protests at the same time. We're barely surviving COVID. Then to add protests to it, it will be arrogance, inimical to the growth of this country, to look down or talk down on these folks. Talk to them, engage them. They're voters. They have a right. This is their country. They're stakeholders. They're not tenants. They're all landlords. Just because you're fortunate to be elected into an office does not make you superior. Indeed, they should dictate the pace at which the country should go, not you sitting down there and arrogating so much to yourself. I mean, I was really, really peeved at the statement made by the Chief of Army Staff. You're failing in your primary responsibility in the Northeast, and you want to take on civil protests that is very civilized and without rancor. It's pathetic. But like I said, and addressing your question, it is important that they engage not solely for elections and not because of 2023, but for the overall good governance of our nation.
Well, Mr. Duke, you mentioned a number of very interesting points there. One of them, you raised in passing the issue of COVID-19. I mean, we've heard that the Government Security Committee in Abuja has announced a ban on all EndSARS street demonstrations in Abuja. The committee is accusing protesters of violating COVID-19 guidelines that regulate public gatherings such as this one. I mean, what is your response to that?
That's infantile ingenuity. That's hogwash, nonsense. We all know that, look, COVID regulations are only recognized or only upheld in government offices and all that. The general public, how many people wear masks? Come to think of it, we're not being we're surviving because we probably have some latent immunity in us, not because of the mask we wear, although it's advisable that we keep all the COVID protocols. But this is just purely an excuse to stifle genuine expressions. If you stifle it today and don't address it, it will come back to haunt you tomorrow. So the sooner you address it, the better for you. And saying people shouldn't demonstrate, which is a democratic right to protest. I think it's definitely childish ingenuity. It doesn't make sense to me at all.
Okay, and we will come back to talk about restructuring, which I know is something that's dear to your heart. But please stay with us, Mr. Duke. We will like to talk with you some more. You're watching the Arise interview. Plenty more still ahead as we continue our chat about the protests in Nigeria against police brutality with the former governor of Cross River State, Donald Duke. Stay with us. Welcome back to the Arise interview. I'm Charles Anyegolu. My guest today is the former two-term governor of Cross River State, Donald Duke, who's also a former presidential candidate, who is speaking to me today amid the continuing protests across Nigeria against police brutality, which are showing no signs of ending. Donald Duke's message of hope and transformation, as well as his crusade from liberation from the tyranny of the few over the money of the many, grips his audiences of mostly young people, with many repeatedly chanting, his name, calling on him to run for the highest office in the country. Well, he tried and failed in 2019, although he promised to redirect the course of Nigeria. But he remains connected to this country's youths, inspiring many of them to aim higher for a better future amid so much chaos, confusion, despair, pain, and poverty. And the former two-term governor of Cross River State and former presidential candidate Donald Duke is still with me via WebEx from Lagos. Thank you very much indeed for staying with us. So what's the follow-up to all of this? Where does it all go from here? What would you advise the protesters to do right now?
Well, Charles, you know, what has set this off is the trigger for this protest is basically frustration and that has been brought about by the SARS, the Special Armed Robbery Squad of the police. But it's also, like I said earlier, it's emblematic of so many other things. If you look at the SARS itself, I mean, how did these folks get recruited into the police force? A country that aspires to lead Africa has such an uninspiring, uneducated, unexposed, ill-trained, ill-motivated police force. How can you dare do this? So it's not even the SARS that is what we should be angry about. Is the folks who recruited the fellows into the police in the first place. This is a country that is suffering from mass graduate unemployment, and then you take literally thugs and put them into the police force. And what do you expect? The larger call is what happens to the rest of the country? How do we address issues? How do we put our best foot forward all the time and not sometimes? How do we ensure that these things that are so plebeian do not reoccur? You currently have a situation where you have mass protests throughout the nation. It's not being fueled or sponsored by any particular group, just youth restiveness. They're upset. There is no leader. This is where it's dangerous. So it's important the various state governments get in touch with them, get them to throw up leaders amongst them so that you have people to talk to. Right now, there's just really nobody to talk to. And that is where it becomes where it is very dangerous. We need to get the governors involved in the various states, help them organize themselves. Who are we going to talk to? Are these people true? The people who come forward, are they truly representative of the group? What are they asking for? They're going to ask for everything. Not everything can be done. Some will have to be paid, but you've got to listen to them. You've got to get the pulse. And this is healthy because through them, you're not cocooned in your various offices and government governors' lodges and state houses across the country. You get to know the pulse, feel the pulse of the people. So in other words, what these folks are doing is really a favor. You can't lead the people if you don't know what the people want. And they're telling you what they want. Then you insult them and transpose SWAT for SARS. I think the Inspector General of Police owes an apology to the people of this country. It's an insult. It's like changing from NEPA to PHCN or UMPADEC to NDDC, and yet you're still doing the same nonsense that you were doing. And this is where people are getting really, really frustrated because those who are in charge of our affairs have become so contemptuous of those whom they're leading that you can actually sit down in your office and say, okay, we're going to change it. It's no longer SARS, it's SWAT. The name is not even original. It's so nonsensical. It's difficult to put words to it. And so let's engage. This is what democracy is all about, engaging. These folks have genuine grievances. And even if they're not genuine, you still have a right to listen to them because they're your citizens. You've got to listen to them. It's important as soon as possible, organize them, let them throw up their leaders, articulate what they want, engage it, and not I saw what happened, unfortunately, the visit by the governor of Lagos to the president. It's a good start, but it's beyond that. It's not a Lagos affair, although Lagos seems to be the most outlandish one, but it's now everywhere, in every river state, various state capitals. We need to engage these young people. We need to allow them articulate what they want. right? And we need to begin to address it in a respectful manner and not changing the name of one organization to the other. I think that is insulting.
And I mean, in furtherance of what you're saying, there seems to be some sort of dialectical process going on here, fundamental sort of change, because I mean, these protests of the past week have to an unprecedented extent demanded changes to the way security forces operate in this country, including both the police and the army. I mean, how much is that a shattering blow to the prestige of not only the government of President Buhari, but the army and police high command? I mean, these are institutions that have operated as almost untouchable bodies and have been well protected from prosecution and by the myth that they're almost above the people. But these young people are saying they aren't, and they need to be reformed and made accountable.
Well, I think the army is a very demoralized organization. We've been fighting a civil war in this country for over 10 years. Boko Haram, whatever guys you want to call it, insurgency and all these fancy names we're giving it, we're at war. People are dying. Soldiers are being mined and killed in the hundreds, in the thousands. We're in a war that we don't have a strategy at winning. So that in itself is demystifying of an organization that we held in very high esteem. Unfortunately for the police, we have never really held the police in this country in very high esteem. And that is because we have not really addressed the issue of policing in Nigeria. Policing is not just going through a very ill-equipped, very poorly established police colleges. And the media showed what we had in our police colleges. Anyone who goes through those institutions is going to come out more damaged than he got in. So you have a police force, and it didn't require this protest to get the police authorities to address the police themselves. In Nigeria, a few years ago, the police went on strike. It's unheard of. So they themselves know that the conditions upon which they work are subpar. So we've got to do a lot of soul searching, not just literally in every facet of our lives, but talking of security, which is primary, we've got to address that. We've got to look at the military. These folks are not able. How well trained are they? How well equipped are they? How mobilized are they? You've been fighting for a war for 10 years, yet you don't seem to have intelligence on your enemy. You're constantly ambushed. That shows a complete lack of intelligence. You have not infiltrated their ranks till date. With intelligence gathering, most of policing work, 80% of policing work is intelligence gathering. They have to be proactive, not reactive. They've got to know what's going to happen. The police ought to have known, for instance, if they had intelligence gathering, that there'll be a protest this way. I mean, if thousands of people can mobilize themselves, what were you doing? You didn't know anything about it? And it comes down to another thing, consequences, the complete lack of consequences in our country. People are paid to protect lives and property. Things happen and nothing happens to them as repercussion. If what's going on now, the first question is, police, didn't you know that there was going to be a protest? Did you start infiltrating the ranks? Did you start engaging them? What do they want? Okay, the protest has happened. Can we talk to them and find out so it doesn't repeat itself? Because these guys are angry. To stay out. Yesterday it rained in Lagos. They were out in the rain. Folks were providing food for them, sending money into their account. And guess what? We canceled. I hope it's not true. I really hope it's not true. I think it was Flutterwave or something. They blocked the account. So you still resist. You see, I think it's still a hangover of a military regime that was out of office for over 20 years.
Okay, I'm really sorry to interrupt you, Governor Duke, but we have to take a break. We'll come straight back to you. You're watching the Arise interview. Plenty more still ahead as we continue our chat about the protests in Nigeria against police brutality with the former governor of Cross River State, Donald Duke. Stay with us. Welcome back to the Arise interview, where we speak to the newsmakers as well as ordinary people doing extraordinary things around the world and featuring the voices at the heart of the stories. I'm Charles Anyagolu. Now, as you may have heard, the Nigerian military has issued a warning to thousands of protesters who've taken to the streets for several days demanding the reform of the police service. They described the protesters as subversive elements and troublemakers. In a statement, the army pledged loyalty to the President, Muhammadu Buhari, and said they are ready to support the civil authority to maintain law and order and deal with any situation decisively. It follows more than a week of nationwide protests against police violence in Nigeria. It comes as the government's Security Committee in Abuja announces a ban on all EndSARS street demonstrations in the Nigerian capital, saying they violate COVID-19 safety protocols and endanger the lives of citizens. So, has the government's patience finally snapped? And are we likely to see troops deployed on the streets of Nigeria's major cities where the protests are most vigorous? Well, with me via WebEx from Lagos, the former two-term governor of Cross River State and former presidential candidate Donald Duke. We'll speak to him some more in a moment. But first, let's turn to Arise political editor Sumner Sambo for his assessment of the latest statements from the Nigerian military and the government's Security Committee here in Abuja. Thank you for joining us, Sumner. So first of all, to the army, how has this statement by the Nigerian military been received by the protesters? I imagine that many of them will see it as a veiled threat.
Yes, apart from that, Charles, there's also another statement actually where we have the defense spokesman actually saying that they will go after those who are attacking the EndSARS protesters, because the EndSARS protesters actually have their rights to protest. And General Endanger, who's the spokesman of the defense, actually says that the protesters have the rights to protest, and the military will ensure that working alongside with the police, their rights are actually protected as long as they remain peaceful and all of that, while pledging allegiance to the president and all of that. Now, on the instruction by the Abuja city authorities after this meeting of its security committee, what they are saying is that protesters need to understand that we are still within the COVID-19 period, and there's a guideline on association of people and all of that, and Nigeria is not yet out of the COVID time. So if that is the case, they should not be converging at a particular point to protest in huge numbers. Yes, their rights to protest is widely upheld, not only by the government, but by the constitution. So they are saying that if that is the case, considering that this is a pandemic that, in the course of protesting, they may one way or the other infect each other. They are appealing to them to actually stay off. But the thing is that all protests right now in Abuja are actually banned. And so they wouldn't want to see processions. They wouldn't want to see gatherings of people beyond the required number as specified by the Presidential Task Force on COVID-19.
And what's that required number?
Well, from 20. Once you go 20 and above, then there's a challenge.
Well,
but you know that, that's the challenge. Even within government institutions, we've had lots of challenges of even the government curtailing staff from converging more. I mean, we've had lots of things, even at the National Assembly, where I'm just coming, more than 20 persons at a point in time. Even the plenary of both chambers, I mean, you see that there are more than 20 and all of that. But I think what the authorities are trying to say is that this is the situation. We are still in a COVID period. But the interesting thing is that, the EndSARS protesters are very young, energetic, and they kind of like are very upwardly mobile. So they are already tweeting right now and informing the government of several violations by the same government and its personnel of the COVID-19 protocols are set up by the PTF. We had pictures of people at the burial of the late Bakari, Chief of Staff to the President. And then we also have...
well, I was also just being told in my ear by the producer Nisi Gabriel, reminding me that a lot of these politicians were holding rallies and things.
Apart from rallies, even the president's daughter's wedding, we had lots of people converging and all of that. So, the people are already giving it back to the government, actually saying, look, these are clear violations by you, and those in power, and yet nothing was done. So why do you want to stop us from protesting? But what they seem, the government seemed to not want to come out outright to say, we want this protest to stop. So using these COVID-19 guidelines, they're actually saying that, look, there's a lot of violations, you may infect each other and all of that. But the youths are actually saying that, look, that doesn't call for obedience to such guidelines at this point in time.
To be fair, that's a difficult one, though, isn't it? Yeah. I mean, because I have to be honest with you. I've watched the protesters, and there just doesn't seem to be any concern about the possibility of infecting people with COVID-19.
Well, Charles,
with all due respect to the issues, which I think majority of Nigerians support them, but perhaps they should consider wearing masks at the very least.
Well, some of them have actually done that, because I was just coming into our office right here, and I've seen that there are lots of soldiers being brought in silently into some strategic points to actually ensure that public buildings and very powerful places are safeguarded and all of that. While I was coming, I saw that the protesters had actually blocked certain places. Some of them were wearing masks. But the thing is that out of the heat and the mingling of people together, some actually removed their face mask and all of that, because, it's hot.
Yeah,
and then they are moving from different places to different places. So as a result of that, it's difficult to continue with their face mask.
Right. So what do you see as likely to happen now? Is it clear yet whether the army intends to deploy troops on the streets of Nigerian cities, such as Abuja and Lagos, where these protests are most vigorous?
There are some strategic areas that we would have troops deployed because of how important those buildings or public places.
If the kids continue to protest in vast numbers in violation of this ban, what do you reckon will happen next?
It will be difficult for the government, because the government, from what I've seen them actually saying and statements here and there, they are trying to protect the integrity that they, in quotes, seem to have, so as not to show to the international community that they've lost out in the whole protest. So what we may see is some of the regular policemen, but now the mobile policemen being deployed. Because if you deploy lots of soldiers on the streets, then there's a tendency that the interpretation within the political circles and the international circle will mean that the government is about losing control. Because the soldiers are the last fort of defense. So if the government is rolling that aspect out, then there's going to be a challenge. And that's why you see some analysts and political thinkers in the past 10 years have been advocating for what we call the National Guard, which was introduced by former military head of state, General Ibrahim Babangida, who had said that there should be a force that is pseudo-military and pseudo-police, so that when you have issues like this, they take care of either internal insurrection or any other issues like this to ensure that, when that force is needed, just like it happened in the US, where you had the police and then the National Guard teaming up to ensure that, the protesters were actually taken off the streets. Things like this happen. But we don't have that now. And it will interest you to know that we already have soldiers deployed to 34 states of the country in special military operations and all of that. So if you deploy soldiers to the streets, then it will be overstretching the military. And that may affect our operations in the Northeast, affect our operations even in the South, where we have all of these challenges. So it behoves on the government to quickly look for a political solution. Now, some of those people in government were looking at these guys as anarchists. But you can see that they are young people, they don't have leaders and all of that. So they need a lot of opinion leaders that should be brought closer, and then a lot of negotiations will continue, and a solution will be found.
You're making some of the points that the two-term former governor of Cross River State and former presidential candidate Donald Duke has been making. So you're certainly in agreement, and I presume a lot of rational thinking people are in agreement with those suggestions. Stay with us. I want to go back to Lagos and to WebEx and link up with the former two-term governor of Cross River State and former presidential candidate Donald Duke. I hope Mr. Duke can hear me there, because Governor Duke, you've been and are a strong advocate of restructuring or for restructuring Nigeria. How much does this rising tide of agitation link into that issue of restructuring, going beyond but including and requiring a reset in the police citizenship relationship in Nigeria?
Thanks, Charles. What is happening today is, in one word, frustration. You have folks who are well educated, have no jobs, have no hope of getting a job anytime soon. So they're expressing their frustrations. And those who are trying to etch a living, they call themselves social entrepreneurs and all that, are being frustrated by the same government through some agency called SARS. In terms of restructuring the country, we want this country to grow. A country of 200 million people, as diverse as we are, ethnicity, religious, tribal, you can't husband us under one roof. The kernel of it is, let each part grow at its pace, but no one should be left behind. And that's very, very important. No part of the country should be left behind. No one should be left unassisted to grow, because you're strong as your weakest link. But at the same time, you don't frustrate the growth of others that have various aspirations and various things. I mean, look at it today. A few days ago, Zamfara announced that they had gold. If you follow the structure of the country today, that gold belongs to the federal government. I hear the governor of Zamfara saying he wants to build a gold reserve. It can't, because once you start that, you're going to start agitation in the South and other parts of the country, in the Southwest, where there are oil resources. They will tell you the same thing, that they need to keep their oil resources as their base. So this is why it's important. What is good for the goose is good for the gander. You can't have Zamfara keeping all the gold it finds to itself, then other parts of the country disavow the oil or other resources that they have. There is no part of this country that cannot, or no state that cannot find its way or cannot grow. I mean, the smallest state in this country is Bayelsa. It is bigger than some countries. It's bigger than Sao Tome. It's bigger than Cape Verde, right? And it has resources that are being exploited. So let us all grow. But like I said, the kernel of it, no state, no people should be left behind, because you're strong as your weakest link. And as a nation, our strength comes from bringing all of us together. If Mississippi, for instance, in the United States were a country of its own, it'd probably be hardly better off than Haiti. But being part of that union, drawing the strength of states like California, New York, Pennsylvania, all coming together, it becomes a stronger part in the entire union. So that's what restructuring is all about. I know that when the word is mentioned, nobody's looking at the benefits. They all look at, well, who's going to have all this resource and all that. The present structure does not encourage states to not go beyond being political entities, but also economic entities. There's no point saying I'm a state and I form a political entity within this union. What do you bring to the union? Are you an economic entity? And if you take a state like Nasarawa, for instance, Nasarawa is one of the most endowed states minerally in this country. But the current structure does not allow Nasarawa to exploit her resources. So all we need to do is go back to the 1963 Constitution. The Constitution was abrogated in 1966 when the military came in. Go back to the 1963 Constitution and adjust it according to the current and present realities. It's not far-fetched, but whatever it is, let us talk. I was shocked when I heard Garba Shehu chastise those calling for restructuring last week or 2 weeks ago. This is a problem we have with presidential spokespeople. They become more Catholic than the Pope, right? You're not doing your boss a favor by chastising people who dare to speak up. You rather, as a spokesperson, you should also synthesize views and let your boss know what people are thinking out there. You can't govern a country in ignorance, which is what is happening. The predominance of the people.
Governor Duke, we're going to come back to you in 1 minute. I'm really sorry to interrupt you, but we must take a break. But what you're saying is very interesting, and we'll come back to you in a hot second. You're watching the Arise interview. Plenty more still ahead as we continue our chat with the former governor of Cross River State and the former presidential candidate, Donald Duke. Stay with us. Welcome back to the Arise interview. I'm Charles Anyegolu. The hashtag EndSARS continues to trend around the world as a result of massive protests against the police and the anti-robbery squad in Nigeria. People have been complaining for years now about police violence meted out against Nigerians, especially young men who are assaulted and forced to pay extortion money, usually at informal checkpoints. Those checkpoints were banned last week, but the protests continued. This week, SARS was disbanded, but still the protests have continued because, according to the protesters, the issue goes beyond just one solitary unit and is about the police and how they treat Nigerians. On Wednesday, there were protests in 15 state capitals and many high-profile young Nigerians have been joining in. But now it looks like the patience of the Nigerian authorities might have snapped, with the army issuing threats and the authorities in Abuja banning any further protests. So is it perhaps time for the Nigerian authorities to seize the moment and restructure and refocus not just the police, but also the country itself, as some politicians have suggested? And the former two-term governor of Cross River State and former presidential candidate Donald Duke is still with me via WebEx from Lagos, and with me here in Abuja, Arise political editor Sumner Sambo. I will return to Donald Duke in one moment, but just in the 1 minute we've got left, Sumner, are Nigerians particularly passionate about restructuring, or do they just want good governance? Because, I mean, President Buhari has consistently said that all you need to do for Nigeria to work properly is to end corruption, and that if you do, everything else will fall into place.
I'll let you know that Nigerians are passionate about both. And it may interest you to know that the country has been restructuring its police over time. It was because of the misdemeanors of some aspects of the policing that we have now, that we had the civil defense coming out of it. We had the Federal Road Safety Corps coming out of it and so on. But the thing is that the removal of these structures from the police is still at the federal level. So what people have been advocating is that if you know that there's a problem with the current federal policing system and you're creating agencies out of them, including the EFCC, then what you should do is to allow the states to actually have their own police. And that's why you have some very senior lawmakers in the federal parliament, like former Deputy Senate President Ike Ekweremadu, who is still a senator, bringing out a bill on state police. But it may interest you to know that during the last constitutional review exercise, it was kicked out. They didn't get the required, because there are fears that actually some governors may misuse. But some people have also said that is the federal government not misusing the current police? Right. So, and then the things that if you go to universities, they have their own police. You go to estates, they have their own police. Before we used to have only the police guarding some institutions. But you can see that now we have private guards and all of that. It's a sort of restructuring, but it needs to be formalized by removing that section 214 subsection 1 that called for a federal police in the constitution and operating a state police.
Sumner, thank you very much indeed. Sumner Sambo is a Rise political editor, and still with me via WebEx from Lagos, the former presidential candidate and former two-term governor of Cross River State, Donald Duke. Thank you very much indeed, Governor Duke, for staying with us. And I'm just being told that 19 governors in the north of Nigeria have rejected the dissolution of SARS. Apparently, they're saying that SARS can be used to fight insecurity in the north. I wonder what your reaction is to that.
That lays even more credence to restructuring, each one finding its own. It's not one cap fits all. In the north, they have a peculiar problem of banditry and herds and all sorts of things. And so if the governors of the state, who are chief security officers, determine that what they want is SARS, so be it. But if here in the south it's different, or in other parts of the country it's different, you've got to respect that. I can tell you that most governors in the south, I mean, we heard what Governor Wike said yesterday, and also the governor of Lagos. They are not in favor of it, but they're the nomenclature, chief executive, chief security officer. It's just that it's a nomenclature. It's not real. Earlier on, there was talk about corruption and how the president sees corruption and all that. Corruption is just symbolic of a deeper problem. And this is why restructuring is important. When you have a weak judiciary, right, and, you're bound to have corruption. Corruption cases go on in this country for 12, 15 years. It exhausts the players, exhausts the court system. So you can, but if you restructure the judiciary or reform the judiciary where justice is not delayed, then you're going to stem some of these things. You've got to expand the judiciary. I mean, the amount of money we put into the political system, right, as against into the judicial system or into other systems, even more than education, is embarrassing. You can't have peace without justice. And we say these things all the time. If you want peace, there must be justice. People impunity also breeds corruption. And it's impunity knowing that the judicial system is so weak that, so I'm surprised each time the president talks about corruption. It's a symptom of a deeper problem. You've got to reform. Policing, I said earlier on, is more of intelligence gathering than enforcement. 80% of policing is gathering intelligence, knowing where the people are, who they are, what they do. Look, in France, if you move from one part of a city to the other, if you move, say, from Victoria Island to Ikoyi, or say from Maitama in Abuja to Asokoro, you've got to register with the police because they want to know where you are, what you do, and all that. Now, we may think that, you're frustrating, constitutional freedom of movement and all that. We can talk about it. We don't have to go that far, but we need to know where people are. So if the states come in, how do they work? Most public services in this country, state and local government, can do without 40% of their workforce. You can convert those idle hands into policing work, gathering intelligence, right? And working alongside with the federal police. And that way you're more likely to be proactive in dealing with issues before they occur and not reactive. If you would get to know if the people and they live amongst the people, they don't live in barracks, because this barracks business is a colonial thing. Policing, you have to live amongst the people. They don't even need to know that you're into policing work. They gather information, they know who is who, or who does what. Then they feed. So if anything happens, they immediately know the various people that have the penchant to get involved in certain activity. And that's why in a country like UK, which is one of the best policed nations on earth, regardless of what happens, within 48 hours, the culprits are brought to book or they immediately are identified. But here it doesn't happen that way. We don't know who is who. And the quality of manpower we put into policing is so poor. You can't say school cert in an environment today. You need policing that is sophisticated, that does forensic work. You have all these graduates who have nothing to do, right? Who the police call it's pathetic, really pathetic. There is absolutely no way this country would grow if you don't address that, if you don't address judicial reform. If I'm an investor coming from another country into Nigeria with the sort of judiciary we have in this country, it's a disincentive to invest. If anything goes wrong, who are you answerable to? A few weeks ago, a gentleman, Kojo from Benin Republic, was arrested by EFCC, right? He was detained, of poor health, extorted, and died in prison. Nothing has happened. His body was carted back to Cotonou, and no one is going to be held responsible. They were asking for this fellow's account in different parts of the world. They wanted to know he had an account in Belgium. Okay, transfer half of the money back here. There is a deep-seated problem. We have to address the judiciary, and that's part of the restructuring. Restructuring is deep. It's not what the way we see it having to do who controls resources here and there. That's a least of the problem. And no one should be afraid of that, because one thing, I say it all the time, no state must be left behind. And it's not going to happen overnight. Restructuring can take 5-10 years for it to be fully effective. The 1963 Constitution started, I think they started implementing that Constitution from 52, gradually disengaging the various regions and them accepting responsibilities. You've got to do the same thing here. It could take 5 years before they're really free to implement it. And thereby, every state would have its own constitution. You don't care how many local governments are in the state, because that's purely a state responsibility guided by the constitution of that state.
Okay. I have to say, this has been a brilliant education. I would have wanted to talk to you about a number of things, more things, because it's always fascinating talking with you. But unfortunately, we're out of time. But I want to say to Donald Duke, who's the former two-term governor of Cross River State and former presidential candidate, thank you very much indeed for joining us. That's it for this edition of the Arise interview. Join us again tomorrow. From me and the entire team here in Abuja and Lagos, bye-bye, and thank you for watching.